And now let's pray. Lord, in this holy season of prayer and song and laughter, of food and candy and joy, we praise you for the great wonders that you have sent us, for shining stars and angel songs, for infants' cries in a lowly manger. We praise you for the word made flesh in a little child. We behold his glory and are bathed in his radiance. Be with us as we explore the ironies of Christmas, the incomprehensible comprehended, the poetry made hard fact, the helpless baby who cracks the world asunder. We kneel before you, shepherds, innkeepers, wise men. Help us to rise bigger than we are. Amen. There's nothing more mysterious than the wonder of conception, the gradual shaping of a baby in the womb, and then the agony and ecstasy of birth. And when you try to wrap your head around some of the biology behind it, the wonder, it only increases. The beginnings are tiny. The connections are intricate. The inception is fragile. The development is miraculous. The weaving together of unique and delicate elements of life is awe-inspiring. On this precarious thread, the existence of each one of us is found. Birth generally takes place only when the baby is strong enough to live outside of the womb, but yet is small enough to still escape. It's an astonishing, sometimes harrowing, and almost always dumbfounding experience. Just look at the tiny toes, the scrunched up nose of a baby's first days. That baby's not going to be able to feed itself for years. It won't be able to wash its own clothes until its 20s. Doesn't really even learn how to take care of their own health until their 30s. And if they're lucky, will be financially independent in their 40s or 50s. It's amazing how vulnerable we are as a species. It's amazing how slow our development is, if you think about it. Horses can gallop within 24 hours of birth, and humans take often more than a year to even walk. It is imperative for us to grapple with our vulnerability if we're going to properly grasp the miracle of Christmas. So this morning, I want to tell two modern stories that help me stand amazed at the reality of God becoming a newborn baby. The first story took place in 2008 in a rural area in Argentina. On a cold night, a man went out for an evening walk. On a walk, he heard a strange sound that resembled a cry. He followed the cries, only to find an abandoned baby who was born prematurely near a gutter on the street. The baby was surrounded by a mother dog and 6 of her little puppies. The dog found the baby all alone and then picked it up like a puppy in its mouth and took it back to its litter. They snuggled up with the baby boy during a series of freezing nights, and they saved him from hypothermia. They foraged scraps and kept him alive. Argentinians still call this baby boy the miracle baby. The second story happened almost 3 years ago on New Year's Eve in a Russian city about 900 miles southeast of Moscow, when a 10-story building collapsed following a gas explosion. Dozens of people died. The night that building collapsed was cold, brutally cold, well below 0 Fahrenheit. Rescuers who were searching amid the debris frequently had to halt their search, while workers tried to remove or stabilize sections of the building that would still remain, that was still in danger of collapsing. Eventually, after 35 hours of searching in sub-zero conditions, they heard the cries. They found a 10-month-old baby, and they pulled him from the rubble. The regional governor then said an extraordinary thing. The child was saved because it was in a crib and it was wrapped warmly. This morning, I want to suggest that these two stories are modern Christmas stories. They are stories that help us understand the vital details of what happened on that first Christmas day. The first one from Argentina, with the 7 dogs and the baby near the gutter. That's a modern day manger scene. A tiny child surrounded by animals facing the cold shoulder of a dangerous world. The second one from Russia, with the patient rescuers in the rubble, the crying baby, that one is about a more pressing danger. More like King Herod's determination to slaughter all the newborn boys in Bethlehem. A danger from which Jesus so narrowly escaped. And these two modern miracle stories, with their vivid portrayal of the vulnerability and the fragility of a helpless baby, they give us a remarkable insight into the unique wonder of Christianity. Let's explore that wonder together for a bit. The first wonder is what we call incarnation. God's desire to be our companion. This desire that was so deep that it involved coming as a human being. It meant being a kid, growing in wisdom and stature. It meant being raised in a carpenter's home, sharing in all the village dramas and struggles, facing the challenge and the tension of ministry in Galilee, and eventually enduring the betrayal and the agony of death in Jerusalem. That's wonder enough. But what our contemporary stories remind us is that it was more than this, was it not? For it also meant becoming a tiny, defenseless baby. Jesus underwent the trauma of birth, which is said to be the worst experience that we ever have to go through. You think Jesus could have just shown up in Galilee, fully grown, good to go? If salvation was just about us getting into heaven, that is, then that's what he should have done. But God wanted to be as close to us as God could. And that meant growing in Mary's womb. It meant becoming flesh as the most vulnerable little person imaginable, at the mercy of teenage parents who didn't even know how to take care of themselves, let alone take care of a child. It meant being surrounded by clumsy animals, dangerous buildings, and hostile rulers. How vulnerable can one get? And this brings us to the third most awesome wonder of Christmas. There's 100 ways it could have gone wrong. If this was God's master plan to fix the world and set everything right, then you got to say the risks register is bursting. What makes the Argentine wild dogs and the Russian rubble stories so amazing is that 999 times out of 1,000, those stories end differently. The baby dies. The baby's got no chance of being looked after, fed, and kept warm by wild dogs. There's even less of a chance of being found alive after 35 hours with no food and below freezing temperatures. But the Christmas story, it's just as scary. Born amid animals, with no place to call home, and then being pursued by a madman, a ruthless tyrant, someone who knows very well how to kill others to keep his power. There's no chance. It's a miracle that Jesus even reached the age of 1. We love the donkeys and the farm animals, the stable, the dusty road, the swaddling cloth, the angels, the shepherds that are surprised by joy. We love the star and the promise of peace on earth, and the wise men crossing the desert with their Turkish delight. We love all the details of the Christmas story, all the sentimentality, all the magic and enchantment. But this part, even the most devoted believer shies away from. Because for all of our anger with God's apparent inaction, in the face of a collapsing building or a gas explosion or abandoned child or a global pandemic, we still tend to picture God as elderly and wise, as bearded and white-robed and a bit gruff. We picture God as all-knowing and all-powerful and able to transform everything in an instant just by snapping God's fingers. What the Christmas story shows us is that God is none of these things. All the things that we distrusted or dismissed about God, they fall away forever when God risks everything by becoming a vulnerable child. We say to God, I hate the fact that you can control everything, but yet you still let bad things happen. And God says, I am a helpless baby right before your eyes. We say, I hate the way that you are so powerful and mighty, and that you have ways to stop those who harm and hurt and destroy others. And that you are able to dictate who can thrive and who will suffer, and yet you do nothing to stop all the injustice, all the tyranny that is around us. And to this, God says, I'm a tiny infant, as vulnerable to rejection and hatred and neglect as you are. And I'm the one who became a refugee in order to save my life. We say, I hate all the chances that I've missed, and how the odds always seem stacked against me. It seems that my life is never going to come out right, or that I'm going to be happy. To this, God says, here I am. I'm a child in your hands. I'm the one who just wants to be cradled in your arms. The future of everything is in your hands. We like to depict ourselves as weak, as vulnerable, as helpless. And then we project onto God all of our anger, all of our frustrations and resentments regarding our finitude. We like to rebel against God because of our powerlessness and our mortality. But what happens when God appears to us as a fragile, utterly defenseless baby? Then all of our arguments about God, they just melt away. What if this is what God really looks like? What if God's only longing is for us to be in relationship together? What if it's all about love? About being with one another in the end? And to show us this, God is crazy enough to risk everything in order to be embraced by us, to be made warm by us, to be cradled by us in our arms. So much so that if we didn't respond, then the whole future of everything, then the entire destiny of God is at jeopardy. What if the only thing that God ever wants to give this world is love? So on Christmas, God risks it all to see once and for all if we would respond to this love, if we were ready for this love. I'm not sure we really want this. I'm not sure we're really ready to have God in our hands. I'm not entirely confident that we're ready for the miracle of Christmas and how it forever overturns our perceptions of God. If we're honest, I think we want a rescuer God after all. We want the one who comes down to fix the world's problems, to end our pain, to send the wicked away empty, to set the record straight and to make all things right. We want the Jesus who comes to hold us in God's hands. We want the one who's going to heal us when we're sick and protect us when we're vulnerable. The God who's going to fix our problems, the God that we can blame when things go wrong. The God who holds us. But that's not the God that we got. The incarnation did not make all the violence go away. The birth of Jesus didn't end the anguish. Instead, we are given a child who undergoes the growing pains of life in this world and promises that God will be with us and will grow in our lives alongside of us. That Jesus is going to be with us every step of the way in our everyday routines and the joys and anguishes of life. We got the God whose deepest desire is to love and be loved. The God who risks everything in hopes of being cradled in our arms. This morning, it's time for us to discover again the real Christmas. Maybe for the first time. The God who risks absolutely everything to be cradled in our arms. God is entrusted to us. This God big enough to make the entire universe, and yet small enough to fit into our embrace. That's the wonder of Christmas. We have the destiny of the universe cradled in our arms. Amen.